Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are going forward. We are on Hey Amid Beis, that is 5b. And this is a very exciting Gemara for Henry, I know, because Henry, you brought up Tiveria in an earlier shir, where someone brought up the question whether a river, whether water counts as a border in terms of creating a walled city. To lane on
it was Zadie's question. It was your Zadie's question.
Oh, okay, very good. So Zadie, that was your question. In case you,
I referenced Southern Manhattan, Wall Street, the Dutch Wall.
Oh, interesting. So that's so good. So that was your question, and then Henry told us about the Gemara that we're about to learn tonight, which actually we talked about Tiveria, which was partially defended by a wall. And I guess I'll spoil it a little bit for you. The Hakir and the Gemara is that in order for something to be a walled city, does it need to have literally a wall, or is it sufficient that it's defended? So water is not a wall, but it does protect the city. It does enclose the city to a certain degree. So we'll talk about that in the Gemara tonight. So one thing I just wanted to start off with was a tostos from last time. Tonight, we're hopefully going to do 3 tososim, so those who are following along. So the first tosos we're going to look at, Versatile doesn't want to learn tosos, I think. So she'll be back in a minute. She just needed a second. So the first tosos we're going to look at is Ubike Shlak or Tisha B'Av Lo Hodin Lo. So if you recall, we learned last time that Rebbe seemingly had a number of really crazy leniencies. Like, it sounded initially in the Gemara like he wanted to get rid of Tisha B'Av completely, which, I mean, I would say that's not such a bad choice. But then the Gemara clarified that he wasn't trying to get rid of Tisha B'Av proper, but he was saying that when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos and is nidchet to Sunday, since it's no longer Tisha B'Av, we shouldn't have to practice it. Now, the question is, what kind of Havamina is that? Tosos asked, Abiki Shlak or Tisha B'Av Lahodlo, Kasha, Heichi Saga Daitach, Tahaitana. Oh, thank you. Okay, very good. The Heichi Saga Daitach, Tahaitana Derebi, Hayarotza Lak or Tisha B'Av Legamri, Varmina, Po'ocha Vashotza Tisha B'Av, Ino Rabin Echam Shleishleim. How could Rebbe want to get rid of Tisha B'Av completely? Did we not teach that anyone, it's a Gemara in Tainus on Lamed Amid Beis, all the way at the end of the Masechta? We're going to make reference to Tainus a bunch of times tonight. That anyone who doesn't mourn over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash on Tisha B'Av, they're not going to see the Nechama, they're not going to see the restoration, the comfort of it when it's rebuilt. Furthermore, more fundamentally, remember what we learned on Beis and Aleph on 2a? Remember what we learned? We learned that Beis Din cannot overturn an earlier ruling from a previous Beis Din unless they're greater both in their scholarship and in their numbers. So how could Rebbe seek to overturn a gezerah from an earlier Beis Din, from an earlier generation that instituted Tisha B'Av? So there are 2 answers. One is even Rebbe in the Havamina, or even our Havamina, he wasn't trying to get rid of Tisha B'Av entirely. Instead, he said, we should maybe just take it down a notch. Instead of having to fast an entire day from the evening until evening, maybe we could just make it like Shavas or Batamas, make it like Tainus Esther, where you only have to fast in the morning. You don't have to set up an entire program with Holocaust movies, etc., to entertain people throughout the day. But instead, just one easy fast at Tisha B'Av, just like everything else. There doesn't need to be lots of shul programming to get everyone's minds off the fast. And then you don't need kinos in the morning. Kinos, by the way, apparently it's not only me. I've talked to other rabbis. Kinos is one of the hardest things to prepare because unlike the Parsha, you have a Mikros Gedolos Chamesh. You can see what the Rishonim say. There's not a lot of good commentaries on kinos out there. I mean, kinos for the most part, because it's a later Ashkenaz, mostly Ashkenazic things that we're reading. You don't have all those generations of people to elaborate on it. So, I remember one time I went to a Kinos reading when I was in Kew Garden Hills. I went to Tisha B'Av davening. I'm like, all right, I'll sit around for Kinos a little bit. And the rabbi, there's a million shuls in Kew Garden Hills and Shtibla, so you're not even going to figure it out. But whoever was the rabbi, whoever was leading the minyan at that point, it could have been one of the Balabatim, he just takes out a book about the Holocaust, and then in between each kina, nothing to do with the kinos, by the way, he just reads another passage from this book about the Holocaust. I mean, it's important to study the Holocaust, don't get me wrong, especially you look what's going on. I'm not going to get into politics, but you look what's going on in the media today. But kinos is very hard. So basically, if we got rid of Tisha B'Av or lowered it down a notch, I wouldn't complain. Okay, so that's one answer. The other answer is the other answer is Rebbe did not want to do a Tisha B'Av altogether, chas v'shalom. He just thought that the 10th of Av was better than the 9th of Av. Why is the 10th of Av better? Anyone know? What's the Sfarad?
Most of the burning occurred on the 10th. The 9th was just the start at the end of the day.
Very good. So Henry points out, the reason you Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, is because that's when the destruction began. But there's also a really good Sfarad to say that the 10th should be when we observe Tisha B'Av, because that's when most of the Heichal was burnt at that point. So that's possibly what Rebbe wanted to do. I realized we didn't get that toast in last time, so I figured I'd start off with it. And now we return to our featured presentation. If you're looking through your Gemaras thinking, where am I reading from? Now you know that I was not reading from the Gemara text, but from Toast on the side.
Yeah.
We're starting the Gemara now with the Rebbe Heichi Nata. Okay, everyone have the place?
Page what?
We are 5B. I would venture to say we are still on the first page in Art Scroll.
5B1.
Yep, so
5D.
5B to the first power. Okay, here we go. So one of the other controversial things that Rebbe seemingly did was Rebbe planted a tree on Purim. What's so bad about that? You'll find out. But Rebbe, how could Rebbe do this terrible thing and plant a tree on Purim? Usually, you think we promote planting trees to save the earth, or plant a tree in Israel. So what's so bad about planting a tree on Purim? So the answer is, well, not the answer, part of the question is, Tani Rav Yosef, Simcha u'mishtav diyantiv. It says in the pasuk that you should have simcha, happiness, mishta, you should have a drinks, you should have a meal, the Yom Tov, and it should be a day, a Yom Tov, a holiday. Simcha melamesh asurim behespen. The word simcha tells us that you're supposed to be happy, to exclude giving eulogies on Purim. We'll look at Tosos about that soon. But as I told you, every rabbi basically, when they want to allow eulogies at a funeral, they just say, really, on this day on the calendar, we don't eulogize people, but we think it's only befitting to share a few memories. So that's our circumvention. Mishta malamish asr b'tainis. Mishta, that you're supposed to have a meal, you're supposed to drink. That teaches us that you're not allowed to fast on Purim. And then finally, the Yom Tov. What's the significance of telling me that Purim is a Yom Tov? It teaches us that just like any Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do malacha. You're not allowed to do work. Some of the things on Yom Tov we allow, for instance, eating and drinking, but certainly one should, and this is generally what we say halachically, if one can take off on Purim the entire day, one should aim to take off on Purim to avoid working. But of course, this doesn't just mean work, but it means malachos, categories like in Hilchos Shabbos. So here's our question. Planting on Shabbos. Planting is one of the first malachos. So new, how could Rebbe be planting a tree on Purim if it's a malacha? So here's a simple answer. So Rebbe was living in the Prazim, in the unwalled cities or villages. So he practiced Purim on the 14th, and he planted on Shushan Purim. He planted on the 15th when it's mutter for him to do that. Aini, is it so? For Rebbe B'Tveria Hava, and this is how we get into Tveria. But Rebbe knew he lived in Tveria. Utveria mukefes chomi mosi shubenun havi, and Tveria was a walled city from the times of Yeshua. So really, Rebbe should have to observe Purim on Shushan Purim on the 15th. So what's he doing? Planting a tree on the 15th when he's observing Purim. Okay, let's swap it around then. Ela Rebbe Baruch Meisar Hava, Bechinata Bar Meisar Hava. Okay, so he observed on the 15th. When did he plant the tree? Calm down, guys. He planted it on the 14th when others are observing Purim, but he's not bound by Purim on the 14th. He observes on the 15th. Is it really so obvious to us that Tveria is considered a walled city that reads on the 15th? Chizkiyahu was not, even Chizkiyahu, we go many years back to Chizkiyahu, he wasn't sure Tveria was considered a walled city. So he's not sure. Who are we to know? Well, apparently, the Chizkiyahu Misafkale, the Rebbe Shitale. Before we get into how this actually works, but we'll just take it at face value. Chizkiyahu was not sure. Rebbe knew more than Chizkiyahu. Rebbe knew that Tveria halachically was classified as a walled city. We'll get into what Chizkiyahu was unsure about, but it's what we discussed. Since it's partially bordered by water, it's unclear whether the water can constitute a wall for these purposes. Okay. Mishari. This is very important. So there's something called Megillah's Tainus that we're going to see. Megillah's Tainus is this document in Second Temple era, I believe, which basically recorded all these random kind of holidays or fasts that we basically almost no longer observe anything in there. But Megillah's Tainus is an earlier text that the Gemara is referring to. Megillah's Tainus precedes the Mishnah. Yeah, that would make sense. It would precede the Mishnah. So Megillah's Tainus is a repository of what Jews practiced back then, before the times of the Talmud. And says in Megillah's Tainus, is so obvious to us that this is permissible that even if I'm observing the 15th, I'm allowed to do malacha on the 14th? It says in Megillah's Tainus, Es Yom Arba Asar, Ves Yom Chamisha Asar, Yomei Puraya Inun, Delom Lemispa Bahon. On the 14th and on the 15th, one is not allowed to eulogize. V'amarava lo nitzacha el latzor es shel zeh b'zeh v'shel zeh b'zeh. And what's the message of this? What Megillah's Tainus is conveying is that even if I observe the 15th and you observe the 14th, it doesn't matter. Purim on the 14th and 15th is usher for me to eulogize on. And presumably the same way, even if I'm observing the 15th, I'm not allowed to eulogize even on the 14th and vice versa. So too, if I can't do malacha on the 15th, I also should not be permitted to do malacha on the 14th. So this brings back to the question, even though Rebbe only had to observe the 15th of Adar, why was he permitted to plant on the 14th of Adar? The answer is, Hani Mili, the Hesped B'Tainus. So when do we have to keep the halachas of Purim on both days? In regards to not fasting, in regards to not eulogizing, things that inherently represent sadness because it's a Yom Simcha. But as far as doing malacha, we might not always be happy going to work, but those aren't inherently things that make you despondent. They're not inherently sad activities. And so malacha is only prohibited on the day itself. So everyone who's on the Zoom right now, I believe, right? We're all here in Stanford or somewhere near Stanford. We're in America, at the very least, it seems like. Yeah. So we observe Purim on the 14th, but on the 15th, you're allowed to go back to work. Now, let me finish this up and I'll show you Tosas on here. Aini is so. Rav Chazia who gathered have a kashadi kisna b'puraya Ulatye lotsama kisne. Is this true that really all you have to do is refrain from malacha on the day that you observe? But there's a story where Rebbe went and he saw that there was somebody planting flax on Purim, and he cursed him that his flax should not grow. And what do you know? The curse came true. So the answer is Hazabar Yomahava. What's the easy answer? Well, yes, he was planting flax on the day that his area observed Purim. But had he been planting flax and doing malacha on a day he was not observing Purim, then everything would be fine. So answer number one. Answer number one, how could Rebbe be planting a tree on Purim? The answer is he planted on the day that he was not observing. Even though he would still have to refrain from giving eulogies, he would still have to refrain from fasting. Nonetheless, one's allowed to do malachas. This is why you could all go back to work on Shushan Purim on the 15th. That's answer number one. Let me pause for a moment. Do we have any questions at this
Yes,
point?
I do.
Phyllis.
We don't have the same rules for Hanukkah. We don't have the same rules for Rosh Chodesh.
Mhm.
We can work. So why is Purim different?
Very good, Phyllis. So Phyllis asked, why is Purim different? So in our first answer, we got two more answers in the Gemara, don't worry. But according to this first answer, it's learned from the Pasuk. Because it says in the Pasuk that it's a day of Simcha, Mishteh, and then finally Yom Tov, the fact that it's specified that it's a day of Yom Tov indicates that one is not supposed to work, just like you don't work on Yom Tov. Yeah.
So it's a higher level of Yom Tov than Rosh Chodesh and Hanukkah, you would say?
Well, you could, I don't know if higher is the right description, at least different. Different might be the best way to describe. I wouldn't say it's higher than Hanukkah. Well, I guess it is. It definitely is. It's different Kabbalah. It's written in Megillah Esther, so it is a little bit of a higher level. But without even having to get into ranking what's higher in its status, it's just, you could say it's a Gezeres HaKasim.
Yeah, I would think that maybe it's because you have a lot of things that you have to do on Purim, whereas on Hanukkah you don't, or on Rosh Chodesh you don't have any specific things other than the special tefillot that you say.
But women aren't supposed to work on Rosh Chodesh.
Right. So I mean, these are more like Hanhagos Tovos. There's no actual prohibition though. That's the difference here. This actually might carry halachic weight according to the Gemara. That you'd be violating Divrei Kabbalah by doing that. So yeah, it's significant. Okay, so that's all answer number one. Answer number two, we got two more answers to go. And then we'll do Tosos. Rabba Bareta Rava Amar. Afilu Tema, you got to look, there's an amended text in that, goes to Tzionim. Tzionim. I always love this thing on the site. If you ever want to see, where's the site? It's in the margins of your Gemara. If it won't be in the art scroll, but I always love how it goes to Tzionim or Tzionim, because it's where the Zionists come up in the Gemara. So here you go. You got that goes to Tzionim. That was always my little joke. Now it says Rebbe Bar Yome. That's an easier way to read it. So Afiyati Rebbe Bar Yome. You know what? Our original answer was Rebbe was planting on the day he wasn't observing. He didn't have to observe Purim. Well, you know what? I'll do you one better. Rebbe was planting even on the 15th, even when he was supposed to be observing Purim. But nonetheless, Afiyati Rebbe Bar Yome. Hespit utaitis kiblu alayu. These aren't actually obligatory. Like fundamentally, on the most basic halakhic level, one really should be able to eulogize, one should be able to fast, and one should be able to do malacha on Purim. But what happened? Bnei Yisrael accepted upon themselves not to fast, not to eulogize. But as far as not working, not doing malacha on Purim, that is subject to minhag hamakom. That is subject to your locale. And the locale of Rebbe, they were okay with doing malacha on Purim.
Including planting flax?
including, and we're gonna address exactly that point in a moment. So to make karaksiv, and what's the rationale, right? Remember, we have a pasuk that tells me not to do that. Purim is yontif. So how do we disregard that drasha from the pasuk? The answer is you got to look at another pasuk. To make karaksiv, you're right. Initially in pasuk Yutes it says simcha u'mishta v'yomtov, but ulubasov, if you go a few psukim later, it leaves something out. Siv latzosam yemei mishta. Okay, it tells me I'm not supposed to fast. It's a yemei mishta. Usimcha, and it's a day of simcha, so I shouldn't give eulogies. V'lo Yom Tov lo ksiv. But in the second pasuk, it doesn't mention Yom Tov again. So I don't have an indication from this pasuk that I'm not supposed to do malacha. So we see from here the fact that the Megillah was a little bit ambivalent about whether to treat Purim as a full-on Yom Tov. It means it's a way of hinting to us that it's subject to us to decide if we want to accept that level of stringency. Rav, my time Hugavra. But wait, coming back to Zadie's point, the question then is, why did Rav curse that guy for planting on Purim? It seems it's a matter of minhag. So, he could say his minhag is to do malacha on Purim. What's the issue? And this is, by the way, a really fundamental concept in Hilchos Minhagim. Dvarim hamutarin, something that's inherently permissible, but it's something that other people, meaning the minhag hamakom, the established custom of that locale, is to treat it as something that's forbidden. So where Rebbe lived in that locale, they had the minhag not to do malacha on Purim. And so this guy might say, well, it's a matter of free choice. There's something in Judaism called minhag hamakom. So I don't want to get too far afield, but we did this year. I think soon after I started working here, I did this one time. There's something called minhag hamakom, a minhag of a place. Then there's also something called minhag hamishpacha, the minhag of one's family. It's a controversial concept whether minhag hamishpacha actually is a real halachic category. Many times when people have a minhag in their family, it's not because their family as a halachic category has a minhag, but your family is part of a broader ethnic community that has a minhag. So I don't, Kinios is always a great example. I don't eat Kinios on Pesach. Why don't I eat Kinios on Pesach? Not because my father didn't eat Kinios on Pesach, but because I'm Ashkenazi, an Ashkenazi community accepted not to eat Kinios on Pesach. That's the difference. Fundamentally, Kinios are mutter on Pesach. Yes, but this is the concept we just learned over here of minhag hamakom. Very good. Now let's just finish this piece and then this section here. Actually, no, we just finished it. Okay, that was answer number 2. Any questions on answer number 2? Answer number 2 is Rebbe was actually planting on Purim itself, but the minhag in his locale was that's permissible to do so. Okay, makes sense? Very good. Moving forward. Answer number 3. The e-boys ema la'olam nahug. No, you know what? Let's take it a step further. Rebbe was planting on Purim, and in his locale, actually, they held that one's not allowed to do malacha on the day of Purim itself. Okay, how's Rebbe going to back himself out of this one? How is he allowed to plant on Purim itself then? The answer is the olam nahug. The Rebbe Natiya Shel Simcha Nata. There's 2 kinds of plantings one can do. You could plant something because your job is that you work in what do you call it?
Agriculture.
Gardening. What's the word? The people you hire to come do your work.
You want agriculture.
Horticulture.
Horticulture.
Landscaping.
Thank you. Landscaping. Agriculture is also good. Landscaping. Yes. You're a landscaper. That's your job. Your job is to do landscaping. That's one kind of planting. That's a real malacha. But then there's another kind, which is gardening, where I just, I enjoy, one of my pastimes is that I have flowers in my backyard and I enjoy gardening. That gives me satisfaction and gratification. I love planting and gardening for the fun of it. So Rebbe, when he planted a tree, it wasn't done for a laborious purpose, but it was done for a pastime, for recreational purposes. So by the way, if I'm not mistaken, this is a similar discussion in Hilchos Chol HaMoed. Hilchos Chol HaMoed, we had like a one class on it in Smicha. And I think the person teaching it, Rabbi Orlean possibly, they made a very good point. Hilchos Chol HaMoed is just like one of those areas of halacha that nobody studies. And by the time like you realize it's here, because what happens, Pesach comes up. Okay, I got to learn about Hilchos Matzah. I got to learn about the Dalet Kosos, the 4 cups of wine. I got to learn about the Seder. And then what do you know? It's Chol Moed. And then you're scrambling to learn Hilchos Chol Moed. And then before you know it, Chol Moed's over. You're like, all right, I guess I'll wait till Sukkot next year to learn Hilchos Chol Moed. And then the same dynamic happens again. I'm also giving mustard to myself over here because I'm guilty of doing that. So, but in Hilchos Chol Moed, a lot of people, myself and Chazal actually point this out, don't realize that one's not supposed to be doing Malach on Chol Moed either. But the reason you're allowed to drive to go to the Arboretum or to do something fun is because you're doing Malacha for the sake of Simcha. That is permissible on Chol Moed, and it's a similar logic here on Purim as well. So that's the answer. Rebbe was doing a planting of Simcha. And by the way, where do we see that there's such a notion of distinguishing? Because I would think in Hilchos Shabbos, we don't care if I'm planting for recreational purposes, for gardening, or if I'm planting because I'm a landscaper. If I plant on Shabbos, doesn't matter what I'm thinking in that regard, I am still Chayiv Misa. We remember Makos, there are 2 witnesses and they warned me and I say, I don't care, I'm gonna plant that tree, I'm gonna plant that flax nonetheless, I'm Chayiv Misa. I get the possibly death penalty for that, for breaking Shabbos. So here it's different. How do we know that we can distinguish in halacha, depending on whether you're doing it for recreational purposes or not? So it's a Mishnah in Tainus. We're making a lot of reference to Tainus tonight, I said. K'ritznan, as we taught in the Mishnah in Tainus, remember that was our other candidate for what to learn. So we're not learning Tainus directly, but we're getting it through Megillah. If the next set of fastings, we learned this in our Mishnah class, if they kept fasting and fasting and fasting for rain and still God did not send rain, then the next thing they do is they minimize how much business they do. The binyan, building, ubanatia, planting, the eretz misuin, as well as marriage. Utana Allah, and what kind of building are we talking about? Binyan shel simcha, building that gives you joy. That means building a house for a chassan. The tia, what kind of planting is forbidden to show that we're despondent and that we're trying to earn God's mercy? Not if I'm it's not that if I'm a landscaper I can't do my job anymore, but rather the tia shel simcha. I'm not supposed to do gardening. Ezu binyan shel simcha zehabono besa chasnas, as we just said. What kind of building is a building of simcha? Building a house for a chassan. That's what they do when they get married. You didn't rent an apartment. They built you a house, and then you live in that house. Then you have Sheva brachos there, and you live in that house. Chas libna. Ezohi netia shel simcha. What kind of planting is a planting of simcha? Zehanotea abornaki shamalachim. This owner makes an abornaki for kings, which Rashi points out. It's some sort of nice little overlay with leaves that gives you shade. So that is for recreational purposes. That's what's forbidden. But why do we bring this all up? To say that one's allowed to do malacha on Purim that brings simcha. So that's why you're allowed to go driving around on Purim to deliver mishloach manos, because that contributes to the simcha of the day. But even though driving on Shabbos would be burning a flame, on Purim it would be permissible because you're doing it for simcha, for joy of Purim. And that brings us to the end of this section of Gemara. So we had 3 answers of why Rebbe was allowed to plant on Purim. One answer was it wasn't on the day of Purim he was observing. Answer number 2, it was on the day of Purim he observed, but the minhag hamakam was you're allowed to do malacha. Answer number 3, the minhag hamakam was you're not allowed to do malacha, but this was a malacha of simcha, and that's why he was allowed to do it. Any questions? Okay, So those who want to, you can glance at Tosfos on the side here. Very important. I want to give you guys a practical halachic takeaway. So you look at the Tosfos, it's the next one, Shasurim Behespin, the third one on the page. Shasurim Behespin, the frek Tosfos Akasha. So Heshiv Rashi, Bechimi Nasan Koach, the main Megillas Esther, Lidchos Avelis. Okay, so the question is as follows. Who gave Megillas Esther the authority to supersede Avelis? Because remember, we already have, before Megillas Esther came on the scene, there was already an imperative to give Kavod Hames. One of the ways that we honor the deceased, which is a Torah concept, is by eulogizing them. So who do you think you are, Megillas Esther, to come later and tell me not to practice Avelis on that day, not to give a eulogy? And you know what? Tosfos says, oh, and Isa behefsid nasar, and even if you want to say that, you know what, but still, Megillas Esther does have authority to tell me not to eulogize on Purim. Why? Because it says it's a day of Mishtan Simcha. Nonetheless, Tosfos says, but you look around where we are, all the Jews, all the rabbis are giving eulogies on Tainus Esther. Sorry, not Tainus Esther, on Purim. So how is it that if the Gemara tells me I'm not allowed to give a hesped, I'm not allowed to eulogize on Purim, why do we see everyone doing it today? You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of a similar discussion about why people dance on Shabbos and Yom Tov. There's a Mishnah Beitza that says you're not allowed to dance, you're not allowed to clap and bang on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So one of the answers given by Tosfos, which is recorded in the Ramah, Henry, you know what I'm going to say, right? The answer is that Enochinami, we're all sinners, but you know what? We no one's going to listen to us if we tell them not to do it.
The concept of that some enactments from the rabbis were impractical because the community didn't go along with them, right?
Yeah, I mean maybe, but that's a hard one, I think, to say. You know, because Chazal told you have to fast for 3 days in a row. You know, like that'd be something we can handle. Can we really not handle not dancing during Kabbalah Shabbos? I don't know. I think it's a hard. I hear what you're saying conceptually, but it's hard for me to believe that people like can't survive without dancing on Shabbos and Yom Tov. But anyway, this is a shir that we did at Shul 2 Simchas Torahs ago, and I wrote a very brief summary of the different opinions on Torah musing. So I'm happy to send it to you if it interests you. So what's the answer? The answer is to what degree do we observe Purim as a happy day as opposed to a sad day? That we don't fall on our faces. Guys, what's fall on your faces mean? What's that code word for? What we call?
Idol worship.
What?
Idol worship.
Oh, no. So we shouldn't do idol worship on any day of the year. I would hope, not just on Purim. But it's called Nefilas Apayim. And actually, for those who are Thursday morning Agadata book club, that's actually the next Agadata we're going to get to, the continuation of our story of Tanur Sha'achnai. We're going to talk about Tachna a little bit. So there's a little information for you. So, you know what? And that's true. We do not say Tachna on Purim. And by the way, you look in the Luach, they'll tell you not to say it on Shushan Purim either. But Tosfos says, otherwise, it seems you're allowed to eulogize on Purim. Not everyone agrees with Tosfos. I'm pretty sure when you look in the Madrich, they'll tell you, the Madrich is the rabbi's handbook for life cycle events. I'm pretty sure it lists Purim as a day not to eulogize, but I have to go back there and check. But okay, machlokes. Very good. Zadie, Henry, we're going to get to your favorite point about Tveria now. We're going to come back to that. So here we go. Gufa, 7:36. Okay, we're good on time. Gufa, Chiskia Kari B'Tveria Bar Beisar B'Chamesar, Misavkale Imu Kevischome Miose Shua Ben Nonhi Hila. So remember, Chizkiyahu, he laned Megillah on the 14th and the 15th in Tveria, because he wasn't sure whether Tveria was considered a walled city. However, why did he have a suffix? We have a pasuk that tells us what Tveria's status is. For Ari Mifsar, the fortified cities, fortified presumably with walls, had Sidim, Sar, V'Chamas, Rekes, Ukineres. Those are the names of the cities that were fortified during the times of Yeshua. Ukaimalon, Rekes, Zotveria. And the city of Rekes is what we later call Tiveria. So we see, black and white, Tiveria is considered a fortified walled city. So what was Chizkiyahu's question? No, this was specifically the question. It's a fortified city, sure. But since one of the sides, one of its walls, if you want to call it, one of its borders was made of water, Tiberias, so since it was water, therefore he had a suffix whether it constitutes a fortified wall for that purpose of Purim. So we have an explicit brisa, right? Why could a Chizkiyahu just take a look at the brisa? So we have a brisa that tells us the word choma excludes cities that their outer wall is not really a wall, but it's a row of houses, and the houses are like apartment buildings. They're all just stuck together, and they create a de facto wall around the city. If I'm not mistaken, I think Yericho was walled in a similar fashion, if I'm remembering correctly.
You can think of attached housing that we have today, but it would go around a city.
Yeah, attached housing. That's what I meant, right? Not apartment. That's a better analogy. Yeah, so it's like imagine it was attached houses and then just around a whole city. It tells you what the government thinks about their civilians if that's the first line of defense. But okay, I guess architecture must have been more complicated back then. But the word saviv, when it says it has to be round, saviv excludes Tiveria that's not completely surrounded by a wall. Now note, this is for halachos regarding houses in a walled city. We talked about it a previous week. We're not going to get into it now. But the Gemara says, for the laws of what's considered a walled city in terms of the status of its houses for land ownership purposes, yes, it's not considered a walled city. But what was Chizkiyahu's question? Not in Hilchos real estate, but Yikam Misafkele Mikra Megillah. My prazu, my mukavid, to see Mikra Megillah. What was his question? How we circumscribe, how we classify what are considered prazim, non-walled cities, and what are considered mukafin, walled cities. Mishum dahani miglu v'hani lo miglu v'hanami migla. Is it that a walled city is something that is the difference between a walled city and non-walled city is whether it's completely surrounded by walls or it's partially open. Or Odila mishum dahani mignu v'hani lo mignu. Or alternatively, it just needs to be functionally protected. It doesn't literally need a wall going all around, but since you have a moat, you have the water over there, not really a moat, that serves as a barrier to stop invasion, so it's considered a walled city. It doesn't literally have a wall, but what makes something considered a walled city or a defended city? Water would count for that purpose. So that was Chizkiyahu's question when it came to Tveria. It's partially open, but that opening is protected by a water border. So that was his question. Okay.
I think that the water portion was the Mediterranean Ocean, which was exposed to ships.
Tveria.
No, Tveria is the Kinneret, the other side, the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret.
Yeah, Tveria is in the east, the north.
Right.
Not
the water is referring to as the Kinneret.
Yeah. So the Tveria, Tveria is, that's what it's known for. Tveria is known for being right on the water over there. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been to Israel also, so I got to remind myself of the geography. But don't worry, if you want to know some names of cities, it's coming right up in a moment. Just one last little piece of Gemara over here, just like a quick fun fact that Gemara throws our way. Rav Asi Kari Megillah B'Hutzal Bar Beisar, Ubecha Meisar, Mesakle Inu Koras Fomo Yossi Shobanun, He Ola Elo. There was a similar suffix in a city called Hutzal, where Rav Asi, because of his similar doubt, he laid on the 14th and the 15th. And then there's another report that Rav Asi actually knew definitively that Hutzal was considered to be a walled city, and thus he laid on the 15th. Okay, just another report about a city. No particular chiddush there for our purposes. Okay, now last part of Gemara, and then we'll do a Tosos afterwards. Remember how we talked about Minhag Hamakom before? We talked about the importance of a communal custom. So we'll come back to that in Tosos after we finish the Gemara here. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ki Havina Talia Amina Milsa B'Shino Savie B'Shtacha Chavasi. So when I was a young lad, and we got the Lion King right? It's generational thing. Okay, maybe someone got it. I think okay. So Rabbi Yochanan, when he said, when I was a young lad, I suggested an idea to the elders, and it turned out that they agreed with what I said. Now, what did he say? He said, Chamas zo Tiveria. So basically, there's a number of cities that are mentioned in Tanakh. They're mentioned in the good old Bible, in Sefer Yehoshua. And Yoshua. Okay, I thought so. Mentioned in the book of Joshua, it's Sefer Yeshua, but these are not the names that they knew them of later on during the times of the Talmud. So the question is, basically matching up the cities that are mentioned in Sefer Yeshua to what we know that they're called today. So Chamas zo Tveria. Chamas is the city of what we call Tveria today. Ulama Nikra Shema Chamas. Why is it called Chamas? Al Shum Chame Tveria. Because of the hot springs of Tiveria, which is a very important thing to know about in Hilchos Shabbos, because the hot springs of Tiveria, we learned about this in our Shar HaGemul class, and we're talking about if hell is a real place on earth, that debate in medieval Jewish philosophy. So the Ramban, he says that he points to the Gemara that says that one possibility of how the hot springs of Tiveria are so warm is that the heat from the fires of hell come up through the earth, and that's what heats up the Chame Tiveria. Also, Chame Tiveria is important in Hilchos Shabbos, so we're not going to go there now, but just keep that in mind as some good, I wouldn't call it trivia, actually, good Talmudic knowledge. Rekes zo Tzipori. Rekes refers to the city of Tzipori. Ulama Nikra Shema Rekes. Why is it called Rekes? Mishum Medallia Karaksa Denara, because it was hanging up, it was high up like the banks of the river. Kineres zo Ginosar. Kineres refers to a city called Ginosar. Ulama Nikra Shema Kineres. Why is it called Kineres? Demasiki Pira Kakala Techinari. Because its peiros, the fruits that it produced in that region, are as sweet as the voice, as the sound produced by a kinnor, by the harp or lyre. Amar Rava. Rava, though, challenges this. The important thing he's going to challenge is the identity of Tiveria. Amar Rava, is there somebody who says that Rekes does not refer to Tiveria? Before, what's his name? Rabbi Yochanan said that Rekes refers to Tzipori. Rabbi says, what are you talking about? Rekes refers to Tiveria. And how do we know this? This is so interesting. He's going to give us a few lines that were used at eulogies back then that tell us that we know that it refers to Tiveria. Excuse me. Vakishchiv shachiv inish hacha hasam saftile hachi. So how do we know that Rekes refers to Tiveria? Because it says that when somebody were to die in Bavel, somebody were to die outside of Eretz Israel, and they would begin to eulogize him in Tiveria, as we'll see in a moment, they would say, Gadolhu b'Sheshach, great is he in Sheshach. You look in Rashi, what is Sheshach? Bavel b'chilif aleph tuf beis shin. Basically, if you invert the whole alphabet, aleph beis, the second letter in aleph is beis, the second and last letter is shin. So they invert. The shins are really beis, and the chaf becomes, the lamed becomes a chaf, but this refers to Bavel. So great was he in Bavel, the shame lo berekes, and he has a shame to him, a great name to him in Rekes. So note, these are the people of Tiberia, referring to their place as Rekes. The Chimaski Arona lahasam, and when they would bring the coffin to Tiberia, they would say Saptile, they would further eulogize Hachi, Oave Sridim, lovers of Sridim, which Rashi explains refers to Oave Yisrael, those who love the remnants of the Jewish people. Yoshve Rekes, Su'u Ikiblu Haruge Omek. Those who are dwellers of Rekes, Tiberia, they should come out and gather in, they should accept and greet those who fell in the deep, referring to Bavel, I believe because topographically Bavel was lower down. Kinoch Nafshi de Rebbe Zera, and when Rebbe Zera passed away, Pasach Aleahu Safdana, the person who began to eulogize him opened up his eulogy as follows: Eretz Shinar Harav Yolda, the land of Shinar, referring to Bavel, was what conceived and gave birth to him, but Eretz Tzvi Gidla Shashua. So, but the land of Eretz Tzvi, referring to Eretz Israel, is what ultimately raised this delightful thing, this person. Oina Allah Amra Rekes, and woe is to her, says Rekes. The people of Tveria are referring to their place as Rekes. Why? And they say, Ki of the Kli Chemda, for we have lost our beautiful Kli Chemda. All this is to say, it's very interesting how often you see in the Gemara that we bring a proof to something, we support it with what people said in eulogies back then. I just find that fascinating. But the point is, the people of Tiberia had a long-standing tradition of referring to their locale as Rekes. So we know definitively now that Tiberia is the ancient city of Rekes. Let me pronounce here. It's Rakas. Okay. El Amar Rabba, Hamas zo Chame Gerar. So Hamas refers to the Chame Gerar, so the hot springs of Gerar. Rakes zo Tveria, Rakas. Kineres zo Ginosar. Kineres refers to Ginosar. Ulama Nikrishma Rakas. Okay, but why was it originally called Rakas? Shafilu, the beautiful line. Shafilu Reikanin Shabba Malay Mitzvahs Karima. That even the empty ones there are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So Reik means empty, like we say in Aleinu, even though I think we admit it, we should really say it. Shemish Tachim Lahevel Vareik. We that those people of other religions, they bow down to nothingness and emptiness. So, and what's it saying here? Even the empty ones there, those you consider the empty ones, they are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. That's how wonderful a place. It reminds me of the stories I remember always being told in when I was a kid. Even the shoemaker, the tailor back in the shtetl in Europe knew Shas backwards and forwards and et cetera, et cetera. So that's what it reminds you. Like even the Reikanan, even the empty ones in Rekes, they already knew all Shas backwards and forwards. You ask me how they knew Shas back then before it was written. That's a great question. Okay. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Rakas Shema. Okay, great. I know why it's called Rakas. Lama Nikra Shema Tiberia. Why did they change the name to Tiberia? One answer is Sheves B'Taburish Eretz Yisrael. Apparently, geographically, it's like the belly button of Eretz Yisrael, where it is geographically. Rava Amar Rakas Shema Ulama Nikra Shema Tiberia Shetova Riyasa. Why it's called Tiberia? Because it is Tov. It is it's an aesthetically beautiful place. Okay, that brings the end of this piece of the Gemara. Any questions? Yeah, any questions on Israeli geography that I probably can't answer? Okay, let me show you one last Tosfos and we'll conclude with this. This might be deserving of its own shear. Maybe I'll put something together on it eventually, but I want to come back to the idea of minhag hamako, having a custom for a particular place. Tosfos asks, you look at Tosfos on the previous page on Hamad Beis, says Dvar Mamutar Bachir Nog Isser. So Kasha. The Rebbe Hitzer based Shan, Without getting too much into the details, basically, they had a chumrah in Beis Shan that they'd have to take off meiser on things that they didn't have to take meiser off of. And that was the established custom there for some time. And then Rebbe came along and Rebbe said, you know what? You guys don't have to keep this chumrah anymore. I am revoking it. And so the question is, why was Rebbe over there allowed to revoke willy-nilly, seemingly willy-nilly, an established custom of the community, a minhag hamakom? But over here, we're giving this poor guy such a hard time about planting on Purim, where, why couldn't we just revoke the custom there also? So V'yesh Lomar, Tosfos answers, Dahasam lo nagu iser ella bitos. Here's the difference. There, and this is something like, I can't think of a good example right now, but I'm sure you could all think about times in your life where you thought that what you were doing was halachically mandated, like you had to do it, and then you found out later on, like, oh, it's just like a chumrah that some people do. I mean, imagine someone grows up their whole life. They think that you have to that's the best example, but you have to keep Chalav Yisrael. There's no such opinion out there that you can drink Chalav Stam. And then he finds out later, oh, what do you know? There's a Tshuva Ramosha that says you can drink Chalav Stam. So arguably, he was keeping this minhag under false pretenses. He wasn't fully informed at the time that he was keeping it. So we don't say that that's called, because it's a minhag tos, because it was a minhag accepted under false pretenses. You didn't know, you weren't fully cognizant of what you were doing at the time. That's not a binding minhag. Whereas over here in the Gemara, when people accepted not to do work on Purim, they full well knew that it was the Chumrah. They knew they were accepting an extra layer of stringency upon themselves. And since they knew what they were doing and they accepted it, they basically dragged everyone else along with them, whether they liked it or not. There's much to talk about as a minhag hamakom. I have a whole entire sefer on my bookshelf. I should have brought it here to show it to you. Rabbi Baruch Simon from YU, he wrote an entire book just on minhagim. And he's not the only one. I think there's Professor Daniel Sperber, who wrote a multi-volume set on minhagim, but this one goes through all the halachic sugyos. So if it's of interest, we could perhaps do that in the future. Anyway, that we are finished. We finished in under an hour, so that's always the goal. I appreciate you all coming here to learn. I just want to reiterate something. A few of you have taken me up on this offer in the past. I just want to make sure it's on the table because I know we have a few new people. I am always happy. I want to make sure. I know we're all coming from different backgrounds. Some of us are very familiar. It's the millionth time we're learning Masechta Gemara. Some of us, it's our first or second time if you're with us for Makos. And I'm always happy to find time to review ideas in the Gemara if there was anything that was not clear. I'm always happy to help orient anyone to learning the Gemara. So, you can always be in touch. I'm happy to try to figure that out. Okay. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful
Thank
Shabbat.
you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Rabbi.
Shabbos. Good Shabbos, everybody.